She told me she was at church, said it with that same calm tone she'd used for years, the one that always made me doubt myself before I doubted her. But this time, I didn't stay silent. I just said, "Okay, I'm out here waiting." And the pause that followed, that frozen silence on the other end of the line, was louder than any scream. That was the moment everything shattered. My wife, Celeste, the woman I had built a life with in the heart of Miami's elite circles, wasn't praying in a pew. She wasn't volunteering or comforting anyone. She was across town in a boutique hotel suite, tangled up in lies and in the arms of a man who wasn't even interested in women. My name is Jackson Ryland, and this is the moment I stopped being her husband and started reclaiming everything she tried to erase: my dignity, my children, my future. This is the story of how betrayal set me free. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're tuning in from. We love seeing how our stories connect people from all around the world. Your comments and thoughts bring this community to life, and we're so grateful to have you on this journey with us. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a cozy seat, maybe a cup of coffee or tea, and prepare yourself for a tale that will captivate your heart from beginning to end. Let's begin. She told me she was at church, the same soft, assured tone I'd heard 100 times over the years. But this time, I didn't let it slide. I didn't nod along like some blindly trusting fool. Instead, I said, "Okay, I'm out here waiting." The silence that followed nearly split the air. No response. Just that thick, awful pause that told me everything. That pause was heavier than any confession. It wasn't just silence. It was surrender. It was exposure. It was the collapse of the life I thought I had built. It was April 2025, and I was sitting in my car in the blazing humidity of Coral Gables, Miami's crown jewel of wealth and prestige. A place where glass towers gleam and secrets hide behind French doors. My name is Jackson Ryland, founder of Ryland Venture Group, father to twins Maddie and James, husband, well, I used to be, to Celeste. And that evening, I watched my world shatter, not with a bang, but with a calm voice telling me she was somewhere she wasn't. Celeste had always been the image of grace and order. People adored her. Our neighbors, our children's teachers, the women at the country club. She had mastered the art of appearing perfect. To everyone else, she was elegant, articulate, well-meaning. To me, she was the woman I met 12 years ago in a gallery opening in the design district. We built this life together: luxury, security, visibility. Our marriage was polished on the outside and, I had believed, solid on the inside. But for the last 6 months, something had shifted. At first, it was small. More events she claimed she had to help organize for church. More nighttime prayer meetings. More missed dinners. I wanted to believe she was exactly who she had always said she was, a woman of devotion. But even in a house full of prestige, emptiness echoes louder. I noticed the way she smiled at her phone and then caught herself. The sudden care she took with her appearance when she said she was just going to confession. And the one I couldn't ignore. She stopped touching me. Emotionally and physically, she was elsewhere. I remember the night everything truly cracked. I had just come back from a deal closure dinner at the St. Regis. It was late, nearly midnight. I called her on my way home to ask if she wanted anything, just trying to reconnect like the old days. She answered breathless, said she was at a vigil, and asked me not to wait up. Something was off. I felt it in her voice. It was too rehearsed. That night, I turned around and drove to the church. Empty. Not a single car in the lot. No lights, no sounds, not even a janitor. Just me and the rising sting of betrayal. I didn't confront her that night. I waited. I let her lie to my face when she came home glowing with false grace, recounting her evening as if she'd spent it scrubbing altars and praying for the world. She had no idea I had already seen the truth. That was when I knew. I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof. 3 days later, I sat in the office of a man named Declan Holt, an ex-Marine turned private investigator with a gaze sharp enough to see through concrete. I told him everything. The time she was spending at church, the night I drove by and found it deserted. He didn't flinch. He'd heard this story before, just with different names and different uniforms. Declan didn't waste time. Within 24 hours, he had begun tailing her movements. Within 72, he had photo evidence. But it wasn't just some anonymous man she was meeting. It was Landry DeWitt. Of all people, it had to be him. Landry was a fixture at our country club, a charitable liaison for the city's arts programs. He was well-groomed, eloquent, and, though this may sound irrelevant, openly gay. Or so we all believed. His partner, Alain, was a quiet, reserved man I barely spoke to, but they had been together for years. They were a staple couple in Miami's social circuits, which is what made it all the more confusing. The photos weren't blurry or questionable. They weren't ambiguous. They were sharp, high-res daggers to the chest. Celeste and Landry entering a private bungalow in the Grove at 11:13 p.m., her hand on his chest, his mouth at her neck. I must have stared at that image for 20 minutes, waiting for my heart to start beating again. I scrolled through the rest. Different days, same patterns. Private spaces, midnight meetings, church as the cover story. I confronted her the next evening. I didn't yell. I didn't demand. I just called. "Hey," I said. "Where are you?" "At church," she answered smoothly. "It's been a long evening. I'll be home in a bit." "Okay," I said, my voice calm. "I'm out here waiting." Another silence. Longer this time. Then came the deflections. She told me to run to Whole Foods to pick up that Riesling she liked. She said she was almost done. She tried to keep her tone casual, as if this were just a normal Tuesday night. But I stayed on the line. "No," I said flatly. "I'm here. I'll wait until I see you." It was then I saw her. Not from the church doors, but from a walkway on the side of the building. Her stride was hesitant. Her face pale. She wasn't in church attire. No heels, no modest dress, just a silk top and the kind of pants she never wore to actual services. She spotted me and stopped cold. I didn't move. I didn't get out of the car. I just stared. She walked up and opened the passenger door. "Get in," I said. She got in. We drove home in silence. I let the tension build like a rope around her neck. And just before we reached the house, I handed her the envelope. She opened it. The photos spilled into her lap like poison. She broke. First it was denial, then tears, then begging. "It was a mistake," she said. "It meant nothing. I was lonely. You were always working. I didn't know how to tell you." I didn't say a word. When we reached the driveway, I put the car in park. "You have 1 hour," I said. "Pack your things and leave this house." Her sobs turned into pleads. But I was done. She hadn't just cheated. She'd shattered trust, family, foundation, and every ounce of respect I had for her. She moved out that night. I stayed in the living room while she scrambled upstairs. I heard drawers opening and zippers dragging across hardwood. At 9:03 p.m., she walked out the front door with 2 suitcases and shame painted across her face. She didn't look back. I didn't watch her leave. Instead, I called Alain, the man Landry had been with for over a decade. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. I just asked, "Are you home?" He was. I drove over and handed him the same envelope. His eyes widened with each image. When he looked up, I simply nodded and walked away. That night, my phone stayed silent. No calls, no texts. Just the quiet truth hanging in the air like fog. and for the first time in weeks, I slept. Not peacefully, but honestly. The kind of sleep that comes not from comfort, but from finally knowing what you're up against. And I knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I just laid there, eyes open, staring at the blade of ceiling fan light slicing across the dark walls. Celeste breathed beside me, slow and easy, like the world was still untouched and perfect. But in my mind, that silence on the phone echoed. The hesitation. That fraction of a second where her lie buckled under pressure. She knew she was caught. She just didn't know how much I'd seen yet. By morning, the weight in my chest hadn't lifted. I made us both coffee and sat across from her at the kitchen island like nothing had happened. She smiled like always, in that sunlit robe of hers, talking about the women's charity brunch that weekend and how the church's expansion committee wanted her to help coordinate sponsorships. The same smooth lies, polished over years of privilege and immunity. But I wasn't listening to her words anymore. I was watching her eyes, her hands, her rhythm. I noticed she blinked more when she lied. She'd stir her coffee without sipping it. And she never once asked where I had been the night before. That was the tell. The truth, she knew, was circling too close now. By 10 a.m., I was already downtown. Discretion was everything in this part of Miami. You didn't walk into a private investigator's office without drawing whispers. So I called a contact I trusted, someone who'd handled a mess for a friend of mine during a high-profile divorce. He referred me to someone even quieter, Samuel Klein, former Navy intel. No flash, no drama, just results. Klein's office was tucked inside a nondescript co-working suite on Brickell Ave. I sat across from him in a frosted glass cube while he jotted quick notes in blocky handwriting. I didn't overshare. I gave him facts. Celeste claimed she'd been attending late-night planning meetings at the church twice a week. The last one, I showed up. No cars in the lot. No lights. No sign of life. I stayed there for nearly an hour. Nothing. She came home smelling like vanilla and cheap hotel soap. Klein didn't flinch. He just nodded, said he'd start that night and warned me that once I had the truth, I needed to be ready to act fast. Lies unravel fast once they're pierced, he said, and people get sloppy when they panic. That warning echoed in my ears as I left. On the drive back, I glanced at the seat beside me. My leather glove box held copies of our joint investments, life insurance, and the deed to our house, all under my name. I hadn't reviewed them in years, but now I did, cover to cover. Something was shifting. I could feel it. That evening, Celeste left the house around 6:30. She kissed my cheek like she always did. "I'll be home late," she said. "Planning committee's finalizing the speaker list." Her voice didn't even crack. I smiled and nodded, pretending I hadn't already bugged the inside of her Tesla. Klein's call came at midnight. "She didn't go to church," he said, cool and detached. She drove to the Metropolitan Hotel on Coral Way, checked in under a fake name, room 1807. She wasn't alone. I didn't speak. My knuckles whitened around the phone. Klein continued. "We got video. Photos. She's in there now. With a man." The breath left my body like a slow exhale. I wanted to ask who. I wanted to know the details. But I didn't. Not yet. Not until I had everything. Klein agreed to tail them a few more times, make sure it wasn't a one-off. I didn't want theories. I wanted a pattern. The next few days passed in a strange kind of slow motion. Celeste continued with her fabricated routine, oblivious to how tightly the noose was closing around her. She mentioned the church more often, almost like she was trying to reinforce the illusion. But it was too late for that now. Her script was broken. I was reading between the lines. It wasn't until Friday night that I got the second call. Same location, same man, Klein reported. They checked in again. And room 1903 this time, checked in under the name Mr. E. Wallace. That name made my stomach twist. I knew it. Elian Wallace, a social coordinator at St. Magnus Cathedral. Mid-30s, clean cut. Always wearing pastel linen suits, always helping at fundraisers. Everyone loved Elian. He was flamboyant in the way that made elite women laugh and relax. Safe. Or so I thought. But it wasn't just Elian's presence that shattered the illusion. It was what Klein said next. They've been meeting regularly for nearly a month, always late evenings, always checking in separately, then leaving together about 2 hours later. This wasn't random. This wasn't just Celeste having a midlife crisis. This was a secret life she was cultivating behind mine, and with a man who had wormed his way into our family circle like a parasite. The betrayal didn't just cut deep. It felt calculated. I spent that weekend gathering everything I could. I reviewed the recordings, read Klein's logs, timetables, license plate photos, entry logs. The evidence was meticulous. There was no room for doubt, no wiggle room for explanations. I printed everything, labeled it, and stored it in a fireproof lockbox in my home office. But I wasn't just prepping for a confrontation. I was prepping for war. I called my financial advisor, told him I wanted a full review of our liquid assets and a potential restructuring of my estate planning. I didn't tell him why. Not yet. But I flagged a clause in our prenup I hadn't read since we signed it. Celeste forfeited spousal claims in the event of confirmed adultery. I took that clause and highlighted it. By Sunday evening, Celeste was preparing for another outreach committee meeting. I walked into our closet and leaned against the doorframe, watching her smooth a sapphire blouse over her shoulders. Her back was to me, and for a moment I wondered if she still felt anything. Guilt, love, regret. "I thought about coming with you tonight," I said casually. She froze for a second, then turned with a smile that cracked just a little too wide. "Oh, honey, it's mostly just the ladies tonight. Really boring stuff." I nodded slowly. "Still, might be good for me to get involved. Community service, you know?" The way her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her earring told me everything. "You'd hate it," she laughed nervously. "Trust me." I didn't reply. I just walked out and left her with her own reflection in the mirror. I didn't follow her that night. Klein did. And the report came in with even more damning detail. They hadn't even bothered to change the hotel this time. Room 2001. Elian had ordered champagne ahead of time. The next morning, Celeste left her phone charging in the kitchen. I knew her passcode. She never changed it. I wasn't searching for texts or sexts. I wanted to see her planner, her calendar. Sure enough, there were appointments that didn't line up with her verbal accounts. Time blocks labeled event coordination at hours no events existed. Church contacts scheduled for days when the church had nothing going on. I screenshotted everything and backed it up. Later that day, I made a quiet visit to St. Magnus Cathedral. I met with one of the senior clerics, an older woman named Regina who'd known Celeste for years. I didn't tell her what I knew. I just asked, "Has Celeste been around the church this past week? She's been saying she's there a lot." Regina frowned. "I haven't seen her in nearly 10 days. I thought she was traveling." That sealed it. That night, as Celeste sat sipping wine on the balcony, legs curled under her in that effortless lounge pose of hers, I stood inside the glass door and watched her. The city glowed behind her like it had no idea the kind of storm gathering in our apartment. I walked out slowly and leaned on the railing. "Beautiful night," I said. She smiled. "It really is." I took a deep breath and asked, "Celeste, is there anything you need to tell me?" She blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean anything. At all. About where you've been. Who you've been with." She set the wine glass down too hard, the clink sharp and anxious. I don't know what you're talking about. I nodded slowly, pulled my phone out, and tapped the screen. A thumbnail image opened. Celeste walking hand in hand with Elian into the hotel, the timestamp visible. I didn't show it to her yet. I just stared at the image. You told me you were at church that night. The blood drained from her face. I was... Don't lie, I said, my voice flat. She said nothing. I turned the screen toward her. Recognize this? Her lips parted slightly, then shut. Her eyes brimmed, but no tears fell. I stared at her for a moment longer. That's not church, Celeste. She swallowed hard. Isaac, please, it's not what it looks like. Oh, it's exactly what it looks like. I walked back inside, left her sitting out there under the weight of her silence. The storm had only just begun. I didn't sleep that night, not because of what Celine had said. That part had already hardened into something cold in my chest. No, what kept me awake was how effortless it had all been for her. The way she deflected questions, the precise pauses in her answers, the way her smile hadn't touched her eyes since before the retreat. The next morning I watched her through the kitchen doorway. She stood barefoot in our chef-designed kitchen, pouring coffee into a stoneware mug, scrolling through her phone. Calm, almost angelic. But I saw through it now, the controlled stillness of someone with a backup plan. Meeting again today? I asked casually, leaning against the doorframe. She looked up, half surprised. Oh, yeah, strategy check-in for the foundation. Might run late. I nodded, not reacting. Need anything? She shook her head, then walked over and kissed me. Her lips tasted like cinnamon. She smiled like everything was okay, and just like that, she left again. I didn't go to the store. I didn't meet with investors. I made one call, to Marcus Lee, the discreet corporate investigator I'd used years ago to vet a board candidate. Need something personal handled, I said. Surveillance, location verification, device scrub. Domestic? Marcus asked flatly. Worse, emotional fraud. He didn't need more. Send me the details. Give me 3 days. The next 72 hours were a private hell cloaked in normalcy. I picked up Livia from fencing, cooked risotto with extra mushrooms because she loved them, smiled when neighbors waved as we walked the dog. And all the while, Marcus sent me quiet updates. First pings, then photos. On the second night, he called me. She's not at a strategy meeting. I exhaled slowly. Where? She's at the Bel Air Crest Clubhouse. Reserved conference suite. Private. 2 phones registered. Hers and another line that traces back to a burner prepaid. And? He paused. I ran facial recognition. He goes by Gentry. Full name is André Gentry Dumont. French-American. Nonprofit liaison. Freelance culture coordinator. Formerly male escort. My breath caught. He's gay? Openly, formerly attached to one of your wife's art contacts in Brooklyn. I can't make this up. I leaned against the wall, dizzy. Celine, she's been seeing him? She's meeting him behind tinted windows, closed curtains, and entering from side doors with no staff, every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. I covered my mouth. My world tipped on its axis. What's the angle? You won't like it, Marcus said, but here's the dossier. The next morning, a package sat at my doorstep. Inside were 23 photos and 7 typed reports. Celine wasn't cheating with another man in the traditional sense. She was indulging in something worse, a deep, manipulative codependency with André, a man who emotionally seduced women for access and leverage. The reports suggested intimacy, not just physical, but psychological. A game of boundaries blurred, control handed over willingly. He played submissive to powerful women, fed their fantasies, and tapped their vulnerabilities. There were transcripts of overheard conversations, including one where she joked about finally escaping the performance of wifehood. That broke me. The betrayal wasn't about love or lust. It was about the collapse of our partnership into theater. I wasn't even the villain. I was just the audience. I didn't confront her that night. I went to the rooftop instead and stared at the skyline, lights glittering across Beverly Hills. My entire empire, my name, my reputation, my holdings, our daughter's private education, all pristine, all clean. But inside, I felt like I'd been gutted. The next evening, I invited her to a formal fundraiser hosted by my brand for pediatric wellness. "Let's go together," I said. "It's important for optics." She hesitated, then agreed. She wore black, a minimalist satin gown that traced her figure. Diamond studs, her hair swept up like always. I wore my navy suit. Power couples often look polished, but tonight we were actors in our final scene. I introduced her to donors, watched her laugh politely, watched Andre lurking across the room pretending to be part of the service crew. I saw her eyes flick once, just once, in his direction, and in that single glance, I saw everything: longing, control, guilt, all layered in a single expression. She was unraveling, and I let it happen. The next morning, I met Marcus again. "I need a full asset map," I said. "Her holdings, joint, separate, shadowed, anything." "You planning a quiet extraction?" "Yes," I said. "With surgical precision," he nodded. "She's been moving small accounts, routing micro-transfers to a crypto wallet tied to a shell in Curaçao." I clenched my jaw. Preparing an escape. No. Preparing to survive after the fallout. This kind of pattern isn't just betrayal. It's premeditated autonomy. That afternoon, I walked through the home office we both shared, traced my fingers along the photos she'd curated. Livia as a baby. A trip to Aspen. My first award. And beneath them, something new. An opened envelope labeled with the logo of a couple's retreat. She hadn't mentioned it. Inside, the brochure read, "Realign, rediscover, reclaim." Couples workshops, emotional role play, deep accountability sessions, and on the inside panel, a quote from Andre Gentry. It wasn't a retreat for healing. It was a tool for replacement. I walked into our bedroom that evening with nothing but a simple request. "I want to take Livia on a weekend trip," I said. Celine looked up. "You haven't traveled with her solo since the surgery." "I need it," I said. "Time with my daughter. Just us." She smiled faintly. "Sure, she'll love it." I thanked her. I packed bags that night, but not for the trip, she thought. We left at dawn. Livia slept in the back seat with her stuffed panther. I drove in silence, heading north to a lakeside estate I'd purchased quietly 3 years ago through a trust. No digital traces, no forwarding address. I made 2 calls once we arrived. One to Marcus, one to my lawyer. I told them the timeline was accelerated. That weekend, while Livia played with local kids and splashed through cold water like she hadn't in years, I filed the motion. I had cause. I had evidence. I had everything. When Celine called to check in, I didn't answer. Instead, she received a notice from my legal team that same hour. Temporary separation with custody reassigned pending review. She called 10 times, then stopped. By Monday morning, her world shifted. When she returned home, the house felt the same, but my presence was gone. The coffee mugs, the folded shirts, my watch on the dresser, all removed. The photos had been replaced with blank frames. Her email was locked. Her foundation accounts were flagged. All that remained was a neatly stacked binder on the kitchen island. It contained every piece of evidence: her burner calls, her crypto transfers, her therapy notes she'd emailed Andre, and at the very top, a handwritten note. I saw you clearly, and I'm done pretending. When I drove back the next Friday, it wasn't with regret. It was with resolve. I met Livia's eyes as we entered the foyer. "Is Mom okay?" she asked. "She's processing some big things," I said, and Livia, wise beyond her years, just nodded. That night, Celine finally returned home from a long walk. She entered the living room quietly. Her makeup was gone. Her eyes were swollen. She didn't look broken, just emptied. "I don't even know what to say," she whispered. "I'm not asking you to," I said. "Just sign the papers." Her hands trembled as she picked up the pen. The silence between us was louder than any scream. But I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I didn't need to. By the time she handed the folder back, the silence had made its point. I walked Livia upstairs and tucked her into bed. She looked at me, small hands curled around her pillow. "Will we be okay?" I kissed her forehead. "We already are." I didn't sleep the night after receiving the folder. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the grainy ceiling, trying to breathe under the weight of what I'd seen. Images of Colette and Jakob, him guiding her by the small of her back, their heads tilted toward each other in the hotel lobby, cycled through my mind in endless, agonizing repetition. I could barely make out the pale gray light leaking through the tall windows of our Bel Air home, and yet everything still felt so suffocatingly dark. The next morning, Colette moved about the kitchen like nothing had happened, humming as she poured espresso into our matching ceramic mugs. She was wearing that sleek white wraparound robe she reserved for self-care Sundays, her hair tied up in a bun that made her look like the woman from our engagement photo shoot. "I scheduled a meeting with the board for you," she said, sliding my mug across the island. "Carmichael wants to review the quarterly projections before Q2. I didn't answer. I just stared at the mug, unsure whether I wanted to throw it across the room or keep pretending. She finally looked up, her smile faltering. "Drew, are you okay?" I nodded. "Yeah, just tired." But even then, my mind was racing. I knew I couldn't confront her yet, not without putting her on the defensive. I needed more. I needed her to hang herself with her own lies. I left the mug untouched and walked out, heading straight to see Ronan. "I want audio next," I told him. "Video if you can swing it. I need to hear what they say to each other, how they talk about me." Ronan nodded, his face as composed as ever. "We'll plant 2 discrete microphones, one in her G-Wagon, another in Jacob's apartment. But it'll take a few days." "Do it!" I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. The betrayal already lived in my blood now, pulsing through every cell. All that remained was proving beyond doubt that Colette didn't just betray me physically. She did it emotionally, intellectually, like it was easy. Over the next few days, I played the perfect husband. We went to a charity gala in West Hollywood. Colette wore a gold silk dress that shimmered under the chandelier light, her hand curled around my arm like a trophy wife clinging to her prize. She laughed with billionaires and hedge fund heirs like nothing was wrong. To anyone watching, we were the power couple, the financier and the socialite philanthropist, beaming for photos, sipping champagne like our lives weren't built on a rotting foundation. But I was watching her differently now. I saw how she checked her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, how she smiled down at the screen like it was a secret. And then I heard it. 2 days later, Ronan sent me a 10-minute audio file. I sat in my office, blinds drawn, heart pounding as I pressed play. Colette's voice, light, breathy, flirtatious. "You're bad, you know that? You shouldn't say those things when I'm wearing heels. I almost tripped." Jacob's reply, "Then stop wearing heels. Or just stay the night. She laughed. Drew's at home. He thinks I'm helping with the charity paperwork. Another laugh. Louder this time. Then Jacob again. He's an idiot. Rich, boring, predictable. Colette. Don't be cruel. He's practical. A pause. Jacob. So I'm what? Recreational? Colette. You're real. That word detonated in my chest. Real. Like I wasn't. Like everything I built, every sleepless night running deals, every time I'd carried her bags from LaGuardia to LAX to Milan, meant nothing because I wasn't real enough. I closed my laptop, sat there in silence. And then, for the first time in my life, I broke. Not outwardly, not in tears, but something inside me fractured. A final, clean break from the illusion. That night, I started packing my own trail. I contacted my estate lawyer, froze our joint accounts, transferred control of my trust back to its original vesting agreement. Anything Colette could reach for was now protected under the LLC and the prenup she never bothered reading. The next day, I scheduled lunch with Harlan Rothman, my longtime friend and our family's divorce strategist. A real viper in court. He was the kind of man who never forgot a face and never forgave a slight. She'll fight, I told him, sliding over a copy of the photos and transcripts. She won't win, Harlan replied without blinking. Not against this, especially not in this state. Adultery still plays well with the right judge. I want full control, I said. Not just the house. Everything. I want her cut off legally, publicly, emotionally. I want her to be so embarrassed she never steps foot in Bel Air again. Harlan nodded. Then we play slow. Pull her into thinking you don't know. Let her keep digging her grave. I agreed. Every moment she stayed blind to what was coming made the final blow that much sweeter. But it wasn't enough for me to destroy her quietly. I wanted the truth exposed. So I invited her parents to dinner. Colette's parents, Douglas and Marcia Kavanaugh, were old money Pasadena, the kind of people who considered scandal worse than sin. I picked the most elegant restaurant in Century City, booked a corner table. Let her believe we were celebrating our anniversary a few weeks early. She arrived in a sapphire dress, all diamonds and gloss, kissing her mother's cheek like she wasn't 2 weeks deep in an affair with a man who wore sneakers to private lounges. We ordered wine. We made small talk. Then I dropped the bomb. I pulled the envelope from my coat and placed it on the table. What's that? Colette asked, her brow creasing just slightly. Something you forgot, I replied calmly. She opened it, pulled out the photos, the printed text messages, a copy of her call log, highlighted. Her face went pale. Douglas leaned forward, confused. What's going on? Colette said nothing. Marcia looked down at the documents and let out a quiet gasp. Is this real? She whispered. I stayed silent. I didn't need to speak. The evidence did all the talking. Colette's hands trembled. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I leaned in, my voice low and firm. This is who your daughter really is, and I thought you should know. Marcia pushed her wine glass away. Excuse us, she said, rising and guiding her stunned husband from the table. Colette stared at me, horror and rage swirling in her eyes. You ambushed me. No, I said. You ambushed yourself. We sat in silence as the waiter brought the check. I paid in cash and walked out, leaving her behind with her scandal steeping in silence. From that point forward, everything accelerated. Ronan began preparing a digital footprint dump, GPS logs, metadata from Jacob's burner phones, time-stamped video of late-night rendezvous from nearby cameras I had accessed through private surveillance networks. I wanted not just to win, but to make sure every angle of her deceit was irrefutable. Then I dropped the final pin. I showed up at Jakob's apartment unannounced. He answered the door shirtless, his expression turning smug for a second before realizing I wasn't there to talk. I handed him a folder identical to the one I gave Colette's parents. "Give this to your husband," I said coolly, "unless you already have." His eyes widened. "What the hell are you—" "Jakob, I don't care what you are, but I care what you did. You knew who she was. You knew who I was. And you still crept through the back door of my life like a parasite." I didn't yell. I didn't flinch. I just walked away. The fallout was immediate. Jakob's partner, Quentin, a real estate developer in Silver Lake, found the file on their coffee table, moved out that same night. By Monday, Jakob was off the PR roster for half the upcoming gala circuits. By Tuesday, screenshots from the affair began circulating in private Bel Air circles, shared under the radar, just enough to ruin reputations without needing headlines. Colette tried to call me 33 times that week. I never answered. She tried showing up to my office. She got stopped at security. She sent long emails. We were broken before this. It was just a phase. I still love you. Each one went unread, because I'd finally understood. I wasn't the man she broke. I was the man she underestimated. And now, I was the man who was about to end her legacy. I didn't sleep the night after Grace saw the photographs. I didn't even move from the couch. She stayed locked in the guest room, the door clicking shut like a verdict. I could hear her crying softly through the walls, but I didn't get up. Not once. There was no empathy left to give her. In the morning, the silence was colder than usual. The villa, usually humming with life, sat hollow. I poured myself a black coffee, ignoring the stack of untouched voicemails on my phone. I already knew they were from her. I had rehearsed my next steps while staring at the ceiling overnight. This wasn't a moment for rage or breakdown. It was time to act with precision. And the first move, getting my daughter away from the rot, I texted Leona's driver directly. "Pick her up early today. Tell the school nurse it's an emergency. Bring her to the villa, not her mother's." A second message followed to my attorney. "Prepare the temporary custody documents. I'm taking Lenny with me. I have evidence." By 10 a.m., Lenny was home, safe and confused. Her eyes searched mine as I hugged her tightly. "Where's Mommy?" she asked. "Mommy's going to be away for a little while," I said softly. "But you're with me now, okay?" She nodded, her tiny arms wrapped around my neck, and I felt the beginning of something solid, my new purpose. That afternoon, Grace tried to come home. I didn't open the gate. Instead, I spoke through the intercom, calm and resolute. "You're not welcome here anymore. I've already filed for divorce. Lenny is with me. You can go through the courts for visitation." I could hear her breath catch, then the sound of her fist pounding the gate. "You can't do this!" she screamed. "You don't get to take everything." My voice remained level. "I didn't destroy this family. You did. And I have proof of everything." Then I ended the call. I didn't have to wait long. Grace's lawyer tried calling me an hour later. I ignored it. The divorce papers were already on her desk by then. Everything was laid out. Asset division, sole custody petition with documented evidence of infidelity and parental negligence, spousal misconduct, and reputational damage. There would be no alimony. I offered her only the savings in the joint account, nothing more. The house, the cars, the investments, the trust for Lenny, all under my name, all protected, all untouched by her. The next day, news traveled fast in Westwood, but not through social media. It began with whispers in the private school parents' circle, then spread to the neighborhood tennis club, and finally into the polished marble halls of Grace's once revered charity circles. I didn't need to say a word. The envelope I gave to her brother Silas, Grace's most morally upright family member, did it for me. He was shocked at first. He refused to believe it. But once he saw the photos of her with Dorian, laughing, touching, unbothered in their trysts, he closed the envelope slowly and promised, "I'll make sure everyone knows the truth." She embarrassed the whole family. By the end of the week, the Marrow Foundation rescinded Grace's board invitation. The president of her women's ministry privately asked her to step back until things settle. Even her inner circle of socialite wives began to distance themselves, one by one, politely at first, then coldly. Meanwhile, Dorian faced a backlash of his own. Photos don't lie. When they surfaced, without my doing, onto a discreet but well-read Westwood forum, Dorian was immediately put on leave from the art consultancy firm he boasted about. His married male clients didn't appreciate the added scandal. His Instagram, once a stream of curated luxury and passive-aggressive quotes, was now flooded with vitriol from men he had allegedly seduced under the guise of spiritual companionship. Screenshots emerged, private texts, voice memos. He tried to deny it at first, claimed he was being targeted for being gay, but the evidence piled too high. His husband, yes, the one Grace didn't even know existed, filed for divorce within 48 hours. Turns out Dorian was married in another state, to a man named Luca, who had no clue about any of this. The scandal didn't just scorch, it incinerated. And I kept silent through all of it. I didn't post. I didn't gloat. I didn't engage. I focused on Lenny. I brought her to school myself every morning. We played board games in the evenings, cooked meals together. I hired a child psychologist to help her process everything gently. I didn't badmouth her mother once. Not even when she asked, "Is Mommy okay?" Lenny whispered one night. "She's figuring things out," I said. The custody hearing came 2 weeks later. Grace looked gaunt, her once pristine appearance dulled by stress. She wore beige, no makeup, her eyes hollow. I didn't look at her. The courtroom was cold. My lawyer, a sharp and meticulous woman named Rosalie Flint, presented everything: the PI photos, the logs, the timeline of Lenny's pickups and missed appointments, Grace's inconsistent whereabouts. Dorian's name was redacted in the official filing, but the judge had already seen the headlines. Grace tried to speak. She trembled, wept softly, claimed regret, and a desire to rebuild the family. But the judge wasn't moved. "I see no reasonable basis to believe joint custody serves the child's stability at this time," she declared. And just like that, I was granted full custody. Grace was given supervised visitation rights for the time being. She cried as she left the courtroom. I felt nothing, because at that point, there was nothing left to feel. That evening, after dinner with Lenny, I stood on the balcony of our Westwood villa and let the silence settle in. The chaos had passed. The damage had been assessed. The truth had done what it always does. It freed me. The next morning, I made one last move. I mailed Grace a final envelope. Inside, I placed the original photos, neatly organized, along with a note in my handwriting. No response required. This is not vengeance. This is closure. I hope one day you understand the difference. A week later, she moved out of the city entirely. I didn't sleep the night after handing the envelope to Ramsey. I sat in my study, the dim light of a single desk lamp flickering off the glass of bourbon I hadn't touched. The silence in the house wasn't peaceful. It was loaded with unsaid words, shattered illusions, and the weight of finality. My marriage was no longer a marriage. It was a farce I had deconstructed brick by brick, lie by lie. And now I was standing among its ruins, breath steady, hands calm. The next morning I woke with resolve. I didn't feel broken. I didn't even feel angry. What I felt was done. Done with the games, the deception, the performances we both played. I showered, dressed in a tailored navy suit, and walked into the kitchen where Ramsey sat, her eyes puffy, her phone locked beside her untouched coffee. She looked up at me, hesitant. "Trevor, about last night." "I'm filing," I said, cutting her off cleanly. She blinked, startled. "What?" "You heard me. I'm filing for divorce today. There's nothing to salvage. Nothing I want to pretend through. And you don't owe me an explanation because the photo said it all. I'm not waiting for another excuse." Her voice cracked. I made a mistake. Please, can we talk? Just once before you... I've been talking, Ramsey. You were listening with someone else's ears." She reached across the island, desperation in her eyes. "What about Mason? We're a family." I stepped back, unmoved. "Exactly why this ends now. He deserves better than the mess you've made of us. And I refuse to let him grow up thinking silence is strength, or that love means submission. I won't let my son inherit that." Tears welled in her eyes again, but I'd cried mine already, in the dark, alone, before I knew the truth. Now I was done bleeding. I turned and walked out the door. At Sterling and Cole LLP, my attorney, Grace Mendel, reviewed the evidence and the marital history I provided with sharp, measured eyes. "I've handled over 300 high-net-worth divorces," she said, flipping through the documents. "But yours is rare. You have airtight evidence, full asset control, and no prenup protecting her. If we move quickly, you'll retain everything." "I want full custody of Mason," I added, firm. Grace nodded. "Given what's here, that's not only reasonable, it's likely. Especially if we can expose the environment she created around him. We'll file for an expedited court date. She'll be served within 48 hours. I left her office lighter, the gears already moving in the right direction. No room for doubt, no more shadows. And as promised, by Friday morning, a courier knocked on the door of the penthouse and handed Ramsey the envelope that sealed her fate. The first court appearance was quiet. Ramsey sat 2 seats away from me, flanked by her attorney, some polished man who looked like he belonged in a reality show, not a courtroom. She looked smaller than usual, no designer armor, no gloss on her lips, just a trembling hand and reddened eyes. The judge reviewed the initial request, full legal and physical custody of Mason, division of property, and denial of spousal support. Grace stood up confidently, laying out the foundation: infidelity, breach of trust, and instability in the household. Then came the documentation: photographs, timestamps, copies of hotel bookings, text logs, evidence airtight enough to suffocate. Ramsey's lawyer tried to object, called the evidence inflammatory, but the judge overruled him. I didn't gloat. I didn't even look at her. I only watched the judge's pen move. The courtroom wasn't a place for emotion. It was a place for facts. And finally, the facts were in my favor. Ramsey requested a recess. Her eyes found mine as we stood. "Trevor, can we talk?" I didn't move. "About what?" "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. "I never wanted to lose everything." "You lost me when you lied," I replied. "Everything else is just consequence." Back in the courtroom, the judge set the next date, instructing a temporary arrangement where Mason would remain with me until the final ruling. That night, Mason and I had dinner alone. He asked if Mom would be joining us. I shook my head and told him the truth, without embellishment, without blame. Mom made some choices, grown-up choices that hurt people. And now we're going to live a little differently. He looked down at his pasta and then up at me. "Is it my fault?" I dropped my fork. "No, never. None of this has anything to do with you. You're the one thing we both love, and that's never going to change. Ever." He nodded, silent, absorbing it all. I reached over, held his small hand in mine. I was going to protect him from the ripple effects of all this. That much I could control. Over the following weeks, I reclaimed my rhythm. My team at Ellison Strategic was stronger than ever, rallying behind me with quiet respect and loyalty. My name carried more weight now, not just for what I'd built, but for how I handled a storm most men would have drowned in. Meanwhile, word of the scandal leaked, not from me, but from the natural entropy of the elite circle we existed in. Once whispers turned into open conversations, the fallout spread fast. Ramsey lost contracts with 2 brands she was working with. A charity pulled her name from an upcoming gala. Her online presence shrank, followers vanishing as fast as they'd once flocked. Even the influencer crowd, those who once praised her marriage as goals, began to unfollow quietly. And Sasha? He disappeared from public life. His agency dropped him, citing moral and professional concerns. Several of his past collaborators denounced him. One posted, "Turns out the man preaching integrity was stealing hearts behind closed doors." Pathetic. His sexuality became a footnote to the greater betrayal. He wasn't attacked for being gay. He was condemned for being a predator in friends' clothing. One morning, I got a call from a reporter at the Lux Ledger, asking if I wanted to comment. I said nothing. Silence wasn't weakness. It was power. Let them write what they wanted. The truth had its own gravity. On the final day of the divorce hearing, Ramsey's lawyer made one last push for shared custody and minimal financial compensation. Grace stood and delivered the closing argument with clinical precision. Facts, timestamps, testimony from the housekeeper, even notes from Mason's school counselor about shifts in his mood and questions he'd asked about his mom's long nights. The judge took no time to rule. Sole legal and physical custody of Mason was awarded to me. The penthouse, the vehicles, the primary savings accounts, all retained in my name. Ramsey was denied alimony. Her lawyer looked stunned. She looked gutted. After court, as everyone filtered out, Ramsey approached me one last time. "I don't know who I am without all of it," she said. Her voice wasn't angry, just empty. "You'll find out," I said. "Or you won't. Either way, it's not my burden anymore." She nodded, tears quietly slipping down her cheeks. "I did love you once." "I loved you the whole time," I said. "And that's the difference." I walked away. Weeks later, I received a card. No envelope, just a card, hand-delivered to my office. It read, "Trevor, I was selfish. I broke something beautiful. I lost you, and I lost Mason, and I deserved every moment of that courtroom. But thank you for not becoming cruel. Ramsey." I didn't respond. Instead, I tucked the card away in a drawer, not out of sentimentality, out of closure. I wasn't bitter, I was better, and I wasn't going to let this define me. Not the betrayal, not the courtroom, not the echoes of a broken vow. What defined me was the life I rebuilt, the father I became, the man I never stopped being. And now, I was free to live that truth, with nothing left in the shadows. The silence inside my apartment was no longer suffocating. It was liberating. The morning light streamed through the tall windows of my brickle high-rise, reflecting off the spotless marble floors. It had been weeks since the storm, but my world was only now beginning to stabilize. For the first time in months, I wasn't waking up to anxiety clawing at my chest. I was waking up alone, but in peace. In the aftermath of the court's ruling, I took a week off work to breathe, a week to let the stillness speak. No more calls from Jasmine, no more legal back and forths, no more whispers of deceit echoing in my head. Just the hum of the city and my own steady breath. The condo had changed, not in structure, but in energy. I'd boxed up the remnants of our life together, photos, clothes, trinkets, and shipped them to Jasmine's temporary address. I didn't read the thank you note she later emailed. I didn't need to. It would be another attempt to ease her own guilt, not to honor mine. Instead, I poured all my attention into Kai. Our mornings were filled with laughter again. He had been quiet at first, tentative, watchful, but children have this uncanny ability to feel safety even when they can't explain it. Slowly, he returned to himself, and I returned to being his father, not a man drowning in betrayal. We built new routines, school drop-offs with car karaoke, weekend bike rides along the bay, late-night popcorn, and nature documentaries. He even started asking to sleep in my room sometimes, just like when he was little. I always said yes. One Saturday, we stood side by side at a quiet beach north of Miami. The wind pushed our jackets against our backs, and Kai held a kite that whipped in the salt-heavy gusts. "You know, Dad," he said, squinting up, "I'm glad it's just us now." I turned to him, swallowing the lump rising in my throat. "Me too, Kai." He grinned, nodding, and went back to guiding the kite higher. That small moment was everything, not justice on paper, not victory in court, but this, my son, safe and happy. Meanwhile, Jasmine had faded into the background. After the courtroom loss and her humiliating exposure, she'd moved out of our old social circles entirely. Even her job at the gallery fell apart after news of the affair made its way through Miami's tightly knit art scene. Her carefully curated image couldn't withstand the reality of her choices. Worse still, Julian had vanished from her life completely. After the courtroom scene, after being exposed publicly, humiliated with receipts and photos, he'd packed up and left Miami for good. Rumor was he'd tried to relocate to San Diego. Some whispered he'd tried to rekindle things with his ex-fiancée, only to be shut out completely. Either way, I didn't care. As far as I was concerned, they were both ghosts. Their names no longer belonged in my home. A week after Kai and I stood on that beach, I received a letter. Not an email, a real letter, in Jasmine's handwriting. It arrived in a thin, beige envelope, slid carefully under my door. I stared at it for a while before opening it. The letter wasn't long. It began with apologies, some vague, some direct. Then it shifted into reflection. She admitted what she did with Julian was reckless and rooted in insecurity, that his attention felt like affirmation in a life she no longer felt seen in. She admitted she lied for months, that she saw how it destroyed the person I was, and yet didn't stop. She asked, not for forgiveness, but for understanding. "I know you hate me," she wrote, "but I want you to know I never stopped loving Kai, and I never truly stopped loving you. I just got lost." I folded the letter quietly and slid it back into the envelope. Then I walked it over to the kitchen and dropped it into the trash. Some wounds aren't healed by apologies. Some just scab over and remain. Ugly, but reminders of survival. I never wrote her back, but I didn't need to. That weekend, I hosted a dinner party. Just a few close friends. Lorenzo, the Harpers, and a couple of colleagues who had stood by me through the chaos. Kai helped me grill on the balcony while classic soul played in the background. At one point during the evening, after dessert, Lorenzo pulled me aside. "You're lighter, man," he said, "like someone finally let go of the anchor tied to your neck." I smiled. "Maybe I just stopped carrying things that weren't mine." He raised his glass. "To peace." "To peace," I echoed. Over the following weeks, I started consulting for a private equity firm that specialized in logistics infrastructure, a role that let me leverage everything I'd built while freeing me from the daily grind of my old position. It gave me more time for Kai, more flexibility to rebuild without compromise. I also picked up old habits I'd abandoned in the thick of my marriage: morning runs, photography walks through Brickell at sunrise, even journaling. For the first time in years, I was becoming someone I recognized again. One afternoon, I ran into Amanda. She looked radiant, relaxed, composed. We crossed paths in a bookstore downtown, both reaching for the same non-fiction bestseller. We laughed, and the awkwardness melted. She told me she'd relocated to a smaller place in Coconut Grove and was working with a nonprofit helping domestic abuse survivors. She'd found purpose in her pain, and I respected that deeply. Before we parted, she looked at me with a kind smile. "You did right by Kai, and by yourself. Don't forget that." I nodded. "And you did right by you." We didn't exchange numbers. There was no need. That moment was enough. Two survivors acknowledging each other's quiet victories. As the months passed, people stopped asking about Jasmine. They stopped whispering Julian's name. The story faded. But what remained was my foundation. Solid, unshaken. One evening, as the Miami sky turned sherbet orange, Kai sat next to me on the balcony, sketching in his notebook. "Dad?" he asked, without looking up. "Are we okay now?" I turned to him. "We're better than okay." He smiled softly. "I like this version of us." So did I. We didn't need the facade of a perfect family to be whole. We had honesty now. We had peace. And I had something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. Not over people, not over outcomes, but over myself, over what I allowed, what I protected, and what I let go of. That was my real win. Not the house. Not the courtroom victory. Not even the financial clean sweep. It was knowing that when the worst happened, when my life was dismantled by betrayal, I didn't lose myself. I rose. And in doing so, I gave Kai something far more powerful than a two-parent household. I gave him a man who doesn't run from truth. A man who stands. A man who knows his worth. A man who, when his wife said she was at church, answered calmly, "Okay, I'm out here waiting," and meant it. There comes a time in every life when silence becomes the loudest truth. When we stop chasing explanations and start accepting reality for what it is, not what we wished it would be. Betrayal has a way of stripping away illusions, but in its aftermath lies clarity. In pain, we often find purpose. In the breaking, we discover who we were always meant to be. This wasn't a story about revenge. It was about resilience. It was never about punishment. It was about peace. Real strength isn't measured by how loudly we respond to betrayal, but by how gracefully we reclaim what was always ours: dignity, direction, and the quiet confidence of knowing we stayed true to ourselves when everything else collapsed. Sometimes the ones who walk away aren't abandoning the fight. They're choosing a better battleground, one where they no longer have to beg to be respected, heard, or loved. One where they rise not with noise, but with power. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. If this story resonated with you, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. We're grateful to have you here.